Hey, good morning. My name is Serena Albauer, and I'm going to be presenting on the topic social interaction today. Social interaction is something that we deal with in our everyday lives. We deal with it with our children, we deal with it in education, we deal with it in business. It's something that is really essential to really the function of our world. So it's really an important topic, social interaction, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we begin, I just want to look at the two words of social interaction. The word social means of society, so it's the society around us, it's the people around us, and interaction is an exchange between people. So when you put the two together, it's basically the exchange of people amongst societies. So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper. What is social interaction? Exactly what is it? Okay, social interaction is an exchange between two or more individuals. An exchange can be any form of communication. It can be verbal or nonverbal, which we're going to go over later in the presentation. But it's any exchange between two or more individuals. It is considered a building block for society. It is said amongst most of my research that society would not exist if it were for not social interaction. If we did not interact as people, we would not be able to build these great societies that we've been able to build and have in our lives today. We would not be able to strengthen into where we are today. Our technology would not grow. We wouldn't have the social norms and references that we have on an everyday basis. Social interaction can be accidental. You can be walking by someone on the street. Maybe you make eye contact, you step on their foot, you say, I'm sorry, you don't know that person. That's an accidental social interaction. It can also be repeated, something that happens on a regular basis. Maybe you see somebody exactly the same time every morning. You say good morning to them, they say good morning back. It can be regular, which is just with your friends, with your husband or your spouse, and you have regular conversation, you interact with them on a regular basis. Or it can be regulated, in which there are terms to how you're going to react. Maybe a debate where there's certain rules that are implied and you have to interact in a certain way. These are the types of social interaction that we deal with on a daily basis. Again, like I said, it is considered a building block for society, and it forms the basis for social structure. We have to have a structure in society if we want society to flourish. There has to be some kind of structure. There has to be some kind of building blocks. None of that can happen without interaction of people. People have to interact for this to happen. And with that being said, it is said that individuals and society cannot be separated. They cannot be two entities, because they are both formed through social interaction. People inherently want to interact. That is what we want to do. Even from the time we are itty-bitty babies, we want to interact with our parents. We want to have some kind of interaction. Society can only be built based on that interaction of people. So they cannot be separated. Neither one would exist without interaction. So that's why they say what they say. Okay, a little bit more about social interaction. Okay, social interaction can be studied between two individuals, which is known as a dyad. It can be studied with three individuals, which is known as a triad, or it can be larger groups. Sociology is actually the study of larger groups of people and how they interact with each other. So dyads, triads, and larger groups. By interacting with each other, people design rules and systems in which they want to live. This sounds very familiar to what I keep going back to for societal values, the basis of society. Together, once people interact, they decide this is how we want to interact with each other, this is how we want things to run, these are the rules we want to follow. They design them on their own, they design this is how we want to live. Symbols are used to communicate the expectations of a society. A basis of communication is formed through interactions of people. There is not just one person that sits down and decides this is going to be the language of our society. It happens with a bunch of people getting together and interacting and developing a system of symbols to use. And the study of social interaction is actually microsociology. Sociology is a study of all groups of people, how they interact with each other. When we talk about social interaction, it is under the sub-subject of microsociology. So let's talk about some examples of interactions. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Obviously, we have our verbal conversations between people like talking. Okay, it can be formal conversations between a student and a teacher, or maybe between yourself and your boss. It can be informal conversations, like two children speaking to each other, or maybe you even speaking to your own child. But either way, it involves talking. It's a verbal form of communication. You are talking and exchanging with each other through words. Then there's the nonverbal communication. This includes things such as eye contact between people, eye contact, or maybe a nod, or something that requires no verbal use, but yet the communication is still get across. I know my students will say all the time that I have a perfect way of communicating with them non-verbally. I can give them a specific look, I can give them a specific nod, I can give them a thumbs up, thumbs down. They know exactly what I mean. So that is non-verbal. One perfect example of a social institution that requires social interaction is our U.S. Congress. Basically, if our representatives and our senators do not interact with each other, there is no creation of new laws. They have to interact, whether it be good or bad, whether it be conflict or whether it be cooperational, they still have to interact. If they just sat there and didn't interact with each other all day, absolutely nothing would get done. So this is a social institution that we deal with in our everyday lives that is very dependent on people having social interactions. Okay, things to consider when you're regarding a social interaction. First, you want to think about what is the physical setting of the interaction. Okay, are you in a classroom environment? Are you in a library? Are you in a party setting? Where are you so that you can decide what is an appropriate form of interaction for me right now? That is the first thing to consider. Second thing to consider, what is the social environment of the interaction? Okay, is it in a classroom, but maybe it's during a classroom party, entity or party type style? Are you taking a test? What is the social environment? Is it a very social time? Is it a time where a lot of people can be interacting with each other? Or is it a time where expectations are low for interaction? That needs to be considered. And finally, what activities are surrounding the interaction? Okay, if somebody walks into a library, we kind of just know that libraries are calm, quiet places. People are studying and people are thinking. So if you walk in with, a big party of people and you're yelling and screaming, that is not an appropriate form of social interaction. And how do we know what appropriate forms are? Brings me to my next slide. We know what's appropriate because of norms. Norms are essential in creating a social society. Norms are what is expected of us. What is expected of us as social interaction in certain places at certain times. Okay? The norms are what make humans act predictably in certain situations. The fact that we know that when we walk into a library, it's a quiet place where people are studying and there's not a lot of talking going on, that's because of a societal norm. There's no written down rule that says that we can't walk into a library and yell and scream and be loud. However, it is a norm of our society that is not an accepted way to interact in a library. These are specific rules or behaviors, and they have been agreed upon and shared among individuals of a society. As we know, societies vary from different parts of the world, so one norm for us might be absolutely abnormal for somebody else, so you always have to take that into consideration as well. And as I mentioned earlier, typically these are not written down. These are not a listed set of rules. These are inherently passed on from generation to generation. They just become accepted by a society of people. Usually parents pass it on or teachers. And it's just how should you act in certain situations? How should you interact with the people around you? What is considered or deemed appropriate? Okay? are 4 types of interactions that I want to go over before finishing my presentation. The first type is the exchange. When people do something for each other with the purpose of receiving a reward in return. I ask a question, you give me an answer. It's an easy exchange. That is the first form of interaction. Our second form is cooperation. This is when a cooperative interaction of people act together to promote common interests or shared goals. A lot of us are educators. We have collaborative teaching days. Okay, we all have a common goal of making a positive and enrichful lesson plan for our students. So we interact with each other so that we can come to that one shared common goal together. The third one is one that unfortunately does happen often. It is conflict. Conflict is an interaction that occurs when individuals have incompatible values. Basically, they disagree on something. A lot of times this involves an attempt to get power. Now, when I say get power, it means the person wants to win their argument. If they disagree, they want the other person to see their perspective. And this often leads to unhappiness, unfortunately. And our fourth type of interaction is competition. This is a form of conflict. 2 people are going to disagree. However, it is confined with agreed upon rules, such as a debate. So debates, people definitely have conflict, they disagree, they do want that power, they do want to win, but there is a designated set of rules applied to the interaction. So let's sum it up. Social interaction is essential for social structure. Societies would not be able to develop without the interactions of humans with each other. Laws would not exist, which would be anarchy. Language would not formulate. And humans inherently want to interact, which is why societies have been as successful as they are. It is a natural fact for us that that is something that we want to do. Even as a tiny child, it's something that we're looking to do. So, social interaction is important in our everyday lives. Okay, so just ask yourself, where do you think the world would be without social interaction? What would we be like? What kind of societies would we have? Would we have anything? I would think no. And finally, what are some social interactions you've been a part of, positive or negative? Have you done an exchange? Have you done cooperative? Have you been part of a conflict? Have you been part of competition? Have you engaged in all 4 interactions? I'm probably assuming that you have. Okay? So that pretty much sums up social interaction. I mean, if I really were to just conclude, we would not be the societies or the world that we are today if we did not interact socially with each other. So I thank you for watching my presentation today. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you have a great afternoon.